This is Season 4 of Southpaw Deep Space Nine. Season 5 will be released on the Southpaw Pod Patreon. This episode was recorded on June 4th, 2024. We are back with Southpaw Deep Space Nine Season 4. If you don't know what SDS9 is, it's Southpaw's completest DS9 watch-along show, where we watch every episode, recap it, and analyze it. We are your hosts, Scott and Sam. Today, we are discussing Homefront. Scott, can you recap this episode?
Yes, I can. Jadzia and Ben are looking at the wormhole. It is opening and closing. Don't really understand what's going on. Bajorans think that it is a message from the prophets, but Ben is dubious as he has not been reached out. As you remember, he is the emissary of the prophets, so when they talk, he's usually there. Worf says there is a priority 1 message from Starfleet, which is very high level. Odo is angry that Jadzia did something. Apparently, a few times a year, Jadzia moves Odo's furniture every bit of just a little, a few centimeters, just to mess with Odo's head, because this is very Curzon of Jadzia, but that's how Daxes do. Odo is very precise in the way they live their life, and Jadzia likes to poke fun at it. And Odo points out that Dax is the most humanoid person they've ever met, which makes sense as they've lived several lifetimes. We find out that 27 people in a Romulan and human meeting have been killed in a bombing, and in the video footage, it appears that a changeling may have been involved, which means the changelings are on Earth. Odo asks Jadzia not to move his things as they get ready. See, Odo and Ben are going to Earth. Ben's dad, Joseph, wants Ben to come to his restaurant, Sisko's, in New Orleans, where they make fresh food, never replicated. And he has a new aorta. And there's a nice father-son thing about health. And Ben is probably going to spend most of his time at Starfleet HQ, which is in San Francisco. Jake is worried that Ben's son is worried that if they go to New Orleans, he'll have to work at the restaurant. It's not uncommon when they go visit their dad that they have to go do prep work and make that mise en place. Miles and Bashir are LARPing and drinking because they can't help Earth in the time of need. And Quark explains that he was also sad when Ferenginar had a recession and he wasn't there for it. Miles asks Odo to visit his family in Ireland, and we learn that Bashir has no one to say hi to. I doubt that's foreshadowing. They will board the Lakota to go to Earth, and we find out that in the spirituality of the Klingons, they killed their gods. And they see that the wormhole is opening. Not as much. In San Francisco, at Starfleet headquarters, Ben and Odo meet Admiral Layton and Commander Benteen. Layton, who had recommended Ben for Deep Space Nine, and they know each other from back in the day, hopes Ben and Odo can find the changelings on Earth. Ben suggests there's more to what's going on, and Layton says, yep. We are appointing you and Odo as the acting chief of Starfleet security, because you guys know all about the founders, the changelings. You know what I mean? At Sisko's, Papa Sisko Joe brings gumbo for his family. Odo is not there. He's staying in Starfleet as they're worried that him being around will make people uncomfortable. And Joseph points out that no one's been worried like this since the Borg were threatening the world in the next generation. But that's another podcast. Joseph looks kind of gaunt, and they keep on asking about his health, and he's like, just back off. And then we see Nog. Apparently he comes to Sisko's every night because Joseph will prepare him grubs just the way he likes it. And Nog explains he's having a hard time in Starfleet. There's this group called the Red Squad that he wants to be a part of, but they won't let him be part of it. And he's like, this is more like school than anything. But he's very happy to see his friends. Leighton and Ben meet the Federation president, Jarachinho, in Paris. And Ben suggests some measures against Dominion infiltration, including blood tests, scans, phaser stuff, and such. But the president is resistant. He's reticent. He does not want to turn Earth into a demilitarized zone. And that is when Ben's briefcase reveals itself to be Odo. Being like, maybe your security's not that good, son. Noting that a lack of security checks, the president sort of accepts that they're going to need some procedures to protect Earth. Ben says, we're not looking to destroy paradise. We're looking to save it. Nothing could go wrong, right? Ben and Bentine test new security measures. You know how they do it? They just shoot Odo a bunch.
It's true.
It's true. He's just like, oh, we're going to figure this out, but just shooting Odo. Low energy blasts detect changelings and make them liquid. So they're like, we'll do a 3.4 beam, but Odo's like, no, 3.5 is the best. Ben orders all of these 3.5 blasters be installed throughout Starfleet, and Odo's kind of miffed that he's not thanked for all of this. Nog then asks to speak with Ben about his difficulty and wants to join the elite squad and asks Ben to help him because he needs sort of like the okay from an officer, sort of like how West Point, you need to be recommended. He wants to be recommended for this squad, and Ben offers says he'll see what he can do. At Sisko's, Ben and Joseph are talking. He's like, I can't talk about business. And Joseph wishes Ben would visit more, and he feels lonely. And his daughter, Ben's sister, was working at the restaurant but isn't anymore. And, Jake's at writing school. Ben's like, just come to space. But he's like, I can't leave the restaurant. It needs me. But they agree to take a walk to the park. At Starfleet, Odo's a bird. Bentine and Leighton arrive. Odo mentioned he's been flying around the city and looking around. Bentine wonders if there are other changeling birds, but Leighton is sort of uncharacteristically rude and weird and is making Odo uncomfortable, and he just continues to be rude throughout the conversation. Odo tries to shake his hand, but he ignores him, so Odo grabs him, and they do the changeling fusion dance, revealing that this Leighton is a changeling. Fake Leighton chides Odo and becomes a bird and gets out of there. The real Leighton, Odo, Ben, and Bentine discuss the imposter, and Odo was like, the dude was being rude, so I knew it wasn't you, because you're not that rude. And realizes that because Odo is the first changeling to hurt a changeling, he's probably not popular amongst his people. Leighton's like, why would they try to be me? And Bentine's like, yo, you're like a high-level officer. You have access to security. You're actually like a great choice. And they agree that the current security measures are insufficient, but are questioning that the president will accept tighter security, because to make yourself, to make the laws tight for safety is not freedom at all. It's not very cash money, and the president is focused on maintaining peace. Remember, he's not just the president of Earth, he's the president of the Federation. He is not a human. Their discussion ends as Ben gets a call that his dad has been arrested. Joseph will not do the changeling blood test. They argue. Ben does the test. Jake does the test. And Joseph's like, y'all are giving up your security for this. You're giving up rights. This is setting a scary precedent. This is whack. I will not do it. And Ben's like, I'll get a warrant. You have to do this. We must get rid of our freedoms to be free. But as Joseph is cutting some food, he cuts his hand and he bleeds. He curses out his son. He's like, I could have just figured out how to do this. I could have tricked you. This is not cool. And then he has a stroke. Joseph is very unhealthy. And if he doesn't change his health, he will die. Despite having all of these amazing medical things going on in this future. But this is what the changelings want. Back in SF, Odo and Ben discuss Joseph's ill health. Odo's like, it feels like humans avoid doing what's best. Ben admits that his biggest fear was that his dad was a changeling. And he's having like changeling derangement syndrome, which Odo points like, oh, well, it's smart to think that. Everyone is your enemy. This is what they want. And Ben says, I wish you'd never found your people. And I was like, I also wish I never met my people. It sucks. At Sisko's, Joseph is back on his feet, chatting with customers, acting like nothing has happened, just doing his thing. He is at home making food for people. And he tells Jake, his grandson, he feels that Ben is overworked and stressed and angry and scary. And before Jake can say anything, the lights go out and the whole block is experiencing a blackout. Ben is trapped in an office by the outage. Odo and Leighton pry it open on the other side, and Leighton is like, yo, the whole global power grid is, including Starfleet, it's down. This must be sabotage to the changelings. Earth is defenseless against a Dominion attack. Remember, changelings, Dominion founders, it's all sort of the same thing, sort of. The president is very angry. He's like, we need to restore this. Ben and all come through, advise basically that they need to do martial law, which would be the first time in 100 years. Dominion fleet is ready to attack the defenseless Earth. Odo worries that the founders are using cloaking devices salvaged from the Battle of Omarion Nebula. Maybe that's what's going on.
A note to our listeners. If you love the Southpaw Project, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. This will give you access to exclusive bonus content, like early releases of Southpaw Deep Space Nine, our fictional narrative podcast, Fighters Brew, break-free versions of our shows without interruptions like you're hearing now, bonus articles, Fighters Brew transcripts with extra content, Liberation Martial Arts Online, as well as our private chat group on Discord. You can also make one-time donations at Ko-Fi or show your solidarity by wearing our swag. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com.
In the wormhole, and they decide to use the Lakota power. Lakota is the ship that is going on in the storyline to power the Starfleet tech. The president is hesitant, but agrees. Ben explains how brutal the Jem'Hadar are in a kind of problematic way, and control of Earth's defenses is basically given to Ben and Leighton. What could go wrong? At Sisko's, Jake and Joe see Federation troops beaming onto the streets. To be continued.
Something that stood out for me in this episode is the language. On Earth, 27 people were murdered by the changelings. What happens when the Federation or Starfleet does the murdering? They'll say casualties. Watch for this use of language in this series or with Trek in general. It's the same word game the US media uses. I talked previously about how, with today's eyes, changelings can also be a metaphor for COVID. And there are a lot of similar reactions whenever changelings come up. With COVID, people were like, I'm healthy. Trust me. No need to test. No need for vaccines. No need to mask. Likewise, here, you have a similar attitude of, I'm not a changeling. Trust me. The other assumption is that people closest to you can't be changelings. It's the wrong assumption about violence and herd immunity, where you manufacture the dangerous other for all your problems. But in this two-parter, they navigate how the call is coming from in the house, which I like. There are other parallels to today, like the COVID state of emergency and the reactions to that and who to blame. Here in this fictional world, there was a literal alien species to blame, but in the real world, it was increased xenophobia and Orientalism. The West sought the changeling to blame. They manufactured the changeling. Another interesting thing for me to find out is how the Federation runs planet Earth and all of the planets within the United Federation of Planets. I guess if I thought about it, I knew that, but this episode made it explicit and showed me what that actually looks like. It's like a NATO world.
Yeah, it's Space NATO.
Yeah. There are so many parallels between the Federation, Starfleet, and Western US foreign policy that replicate themselves in our media. Especially with the geopolitics of today, felt very familiar. This episode also feels like a move toward long-term consistent storytelling, where there are stakes, high stakes. It doesn't feel like a throwaway episode, which I'm glad to get. But the throwaway conversation Quark has about a financial crisis in Ferenginar is interesting to me because since the show has aired, we've lived through several financial crises and living through inflation right now and a time of worsening income disparity. Scott, give me your thoughts about this episode, how you rate it, and if any scenes stuck out for you, like that scene stuck out for me.
So this episode is very important in the framing of several key points that will affect the show writ large. So because of that, giving it anything under a 4 would just be something I wouldn't want to do. In retrospect, watching it again, it's very upsetting because you're like, oh, this is all about giving up freedom to be more free. So what do you have? And it does feel a little bit like early pandemic behavior and fear mongering and things of that nature, but any sort of boogie person that the government tries to create. So rewatching, I remember not really thinking much of this episode the last time I watched it, but watching it now with the context that we were using and the lens that we were using and the socio-political landscape that we exist in. And I think about affordances and how people don't start from being a good person to being a bad person. They make little steps. So the little steps that are made to make us feel more safe until we live in a totalitarian wasteland is very evident. And having Ben's father be the voice of reason, one, is good writing because he's the kind of character that would be that way. he's the kind of guy that will not use replicated food and just really holds on to the old ways of enjoying life. But it's also showing the mania of fear. Just how you'd hear of in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic I remember even myself visiting my mom for the first time when we were so scared of hurting each other that both of us were wearing sunglasses, masks, hats, gloves, standing 10 feet away from each other, using the bathroom out of fear. And we were just like, oh, well, it's okay because we're safe. And then slowly we've had to figure out how to maneuver the world that we live in now, where there's lots of dangers, but we have to figure out how to do it. So that's a lot of what I came in from this episode, and how a well cared for community will sort of dissuade the need to be afraid and scared, because as someone who really relates to the idea of anarcho-communism but questions its applicability, the idea that we will all just look out for each other and make rules based on the necessity of us believing the best in us is very strong. But that is not what happened here. It's a lot of fear mongering, a lot of exposition, and a lot of setting up for the next episode. And again, a lot of points that will reverberate moving forward. But yeah, this episode's like a 4.
I could see myself where if I watched this when it first aired, I might have 1 rating in my mind. But then watching it again after everything we've been through as a society and what I've been through, I think I will automatically give it an extra 0.5. Maybe if I was like, first time I watched it, maybe it was like a 3, 3.5, but now it's like going to be a 4, 4.5.
Exactly. This episode meant nothing to me the last time I watched it. But now the world that we are in, which is why I think it's important to have other options on how to listen to podcasts like this. I think it's important when creating a completist podcast to not have context is, in my opinion, irresponsible. Because don't get me wrong, their mission log is fine as a podcast. But not only do they not go deeper into the politics, they often dissuade themselves from tangents and from discussing these things. And granted, we're not doing every single episode of Star Trek. I don't think either of us have the ability to. We're just doing Deep Space Nine. But before Discovery, Deep Space Nine was the political outlier. And it's important to be touched on as such.
If I could add something to that, when podcasters try to make evergreen episodes, and that term in podcasting and in online media content, it means a piece of content that will last forever. Whenever people attempt that, those are the things that actually age very poorly because it's completely insensitive to everything that's happening.
Also, doing an apolitical Star Trek podcast, in my opinion, is like doing an apolitical Full Metal Alchemist podcast.
Because the shows are political.
Correct.
There's politics within the episode that's happening.
And that's obviously going to be the next show that you and I do is Southpaw Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
But going back to this show, another thing that I thought about while listening to you recap the episode and talk about Ben, Sisko's father, is how if I watched this episode when it first aired, my read of him is going to be different today. I might have read him one way when I first watched him, but my read of him now is more complicated. Meaning, the first watch, maybe when it first aired, I might have just seen him as a voice of reason. Whereas today, I'm of 2 minds of it. I could kind of read him like a throwback. Maybe he's like an elder who's knowledgeable and has some wisdom. But at the same time, this could also be like how people who are MAGA, people who are like make America great again, how everything in the past was better. I'm not going to do any of the new stuff. What's up with all this new wokeism and new this, and this? I'm against all that stuff, right? But those people can see themselves like Ben Sisko's father. And oftentimes that's what they say. They're like a rational person who are just like, we're going too far. This is too much, right? I'm not saying that's the correct read, but I wouldn't have had that read in the past. Whereas now I'm like, I know people like that, especially after COVID, who sounded like this, who sounded reasonable. But then when you started like digging deeper into it, right? There was all these people who seemed cool like years ago, or people we didn't really think about what they were saying. And during that time, right, of Black Lives Matter, COVID, so many people got exposed because people started really investigating. What the hell are they saying? What do they really mean? What are they talking about with rationality? It's wild now to think, but people back in the day, and even a lot of leftists and liberals and all sorts of people like Joe Rogan. It was during that time when people really started investigating. Wait a minute, his open-mindedness, his throwback, like, let's be reasonable here. It's not what it seems, right? So I think there's that new layer of read today.
Yeah. You know, I've been rereading this really excellent book called The African Cosmology of the Bantu Congo. And basically it's a cosmology of a spiritual system that's basically like community is spirit. And I'm pretty into it. And I think a thoughtful community, which is quite opposite from the libertarian myth, will look out for each other. Libertarians are not, I don't know, it's like white bros are taught libertarian, like that's the way, when really universalism and community is what we really need. And if you just look into New Hampshire libertarian experiment, you'll understand the silliness of it, and that like when community looks out for each other, you will be successful. And when you assume people will be altruistic is a dangerous thing.
If you love the Southpaw Project, become one of our financial supporters. It'll help us supplement the cost of running this project, the incredible time and energy we put into it 7 days a week, and you'll be giving us some breathing room, not only to juggle Southpaw with our day jobs, but also to expand Southpaw into other areas. We can't exist without your contributions. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at southpawpod.com. You mentioned this before with that altruistic, compassionate, effective, capitalism that doesn't exist, right?
It doesn't exist.
Going back to how we read things, right? And how things might seem rational or things might seem like folksy wisdom when we're angsty teenagers, right? A lot of that, what you're talking about, libertarianism, kind of sounds folksy. It kind of sounds like, common sense wisdom, right? But then as you mature and think through things deeper, think better of things, you're like, nah. Like there's how things sound when you first hear it, but then when you think about the consequences and the next steps, it's not as reasonable as you first thought. And libertarianism is kind of like that. But since this is a two-parter, let's move on to the next episode, Paradise Lost. Scott, can you tell us about this episode?
I suppose so. Paradise Lost. John Milton, no, just kidding. After the global blackout, Earth is in a state of emergency, and Starfleet security is all over the place. At the headquarters, Ben tells Odo that he feels like he has more questions than answers about all the sabotage. There's curiosity. How could the changelings infiltrate or get access to the codes, right? Kind of weird. Odo also notes that the Red Squad, which is the group of the super cadets we talked about earlier, they were actually beamed back to the academy right after the emergency was declared and then disappeared, which is weird. In New Orleans, Joseph and Jake want to open the restaurant, but the streets are bare except for soldiers. At Starfleet, Ben contacts the academy to talk about the transporter record of the Red Squad. The commandant is like, does Leighton know? But Ben's like, I don't know. And Ben is ordered to destroy the records. Ben agrees to it. And then Odo's like, yeah, there's a lot of questions. But back at Sisko's restaurant, at this point, Joseph is even okay with the test because everybody is scared. Ben is like, tell me more about the Red Squad to Nog. Nog is like, they're fearless. I want to be them. And they're starting to talk to me because of my proximity to you. And Ben's like, all right, I order you to introduce me to the Red Squad. So at Starfleet Academy, Ben interviews this cadet named Riley. And he reveals that the Red Squad was involved in the power outage and were tasked to make sure that there was no record of it. What? Back in NOLA, Ben and Odo are like, wait, the Dominion couldn't have been involved. Is it possible that the killer is inside the house? Statistically, they almost always are. Ben reluctantly agrees to Odo's theory that Starfleet may have been the little kids and maybe more have been led by Leighton to maybe create an emergency as a way to start a coup d'etat. So Ben tries to tell the president that Leighton did this out of paranoia to end the Dominion fear and get the world to support the martial law. But the president is like, I need proof. And curiously, the Red Squad has disappeared. And Ben talks to Leighton. He's like, yep, I did it. Do you want to join the coup? We need to destroy Paradise to save it. And Leighton reminds Ben of how they used to work together and how they once talked about how a good officer must accept the chain of command. And Leighton commands Ben to respect his authority. But Ben says no. And he's ordered to go back to Deep Space Nine and will no longer be the head of security of Earth. Sitting, he runs into a changeling dressed as Miles O'Brien. And he says, look, dude, there's only 4 changelings on Earth. That's actually all we need to create chaos. And we're just going to use fear as a weapon, bro. And we see Ben and Joseph talking about life, and that Joseph talks about how Ben used to be scared of women and never used to do things, and would at a certain point you must stop asking and start doing. And Ben needs to make a decision on what to do. And we learn a little bit about lore of Ben and his love life. We see Ben talking to Kira. They're planning something. The wormhole isn't opening anymore, and there's a plan, but we aren't told the plan. Odo and Ben break into Starfleet. At Starfleet headquarters, Odo and Sisko basically uncover as they say in the movie Minority Report, an orgy of evidence, a flurry of personnel transfers that Leighton has been orchestrating, like hundreds of officers in the past few weeks, all of them tied to Leighton, and even more upcoming transfers that are about to happen right before a critical speech by the president, Jarish Inyo. And Sisko Ben saves the files onto his device and urges Odo to get out of here and get Jake and Joseph safe. Meanwhile, Benteen, who has been promoted by Leighton, arrives and is like, I am now the captain of the USS Lakota, bro. Curious. Ben is going to go tell the truth about Leighton in front of the president, but then right there, they grab Ben's blood and they fake it to look like a changeling, because he's not a changeling. In the brig, Leighton describes everything that he's doing, that he'll let Ben go in a few days, but he's going to stop the president from making the speech. The army will take over. Leighton will be the emperor to save the Federation from itself. But Odo breaks Ben out, and the Defiant is on its way to Earth. Ben warns Odo to let the president know of what is what. Again, Ben confronts Leighton and makes him confess to treason, and that it turns out that Leighton was making the wormhole open to create discomfort, to make people think that the Dominion was using cloaking devices to go in and out. This is all manufactured by Leighton. And as this is happening, the Lakota, under the orders that the Defiant is filled with changelings, demands it lower his shield, and the Defiant responds by charging their weapons. Ben begs Leighton to let this go. What you're suggesting is a dictatorship. But Leighton says that strength begets strength and tells the Defiant to stand down. Pandora's box of war is about to be opened. The Lakota fires the Defiant. It's bad. They have a firefight. Lots of 90s CGI. As the battle goes on, Leighton talks about leadership and loyalty and legacy, and Ben points out the irony that Leighton has no honor. And Leighton orders the Lakota to destroy the Defiant. And Ben's like, if you do this, you are just murdering your people. And in all of this, the Lakota powers down and hails them. But already casualties have happened. Just under 100 people have died. But Ben has Leighton cornered. He is lost. Leighton resigns, drops his stuff on the table, and warns of the mistakes Ben is making. Martial law is ended. Odo is worried, but there's freedom and safety, and there needs to be uncertainty. And Joseph agrees to take his medicine. The end.
These two episodes really tell you where the rest of this series is going. Rather than just visiting spot to spot like on a ship, I like that there will be a long through line for the series. And that's probably why there are so many devoted fans. They're devoted to the story rather than only to the concepts and the characters. Going back to the call coming from inside the house, we see there's been a false flag attack. Starfleet and the US are not above this, and in fact are masters of stuff like this. There's also the use of child soldiers, i.e. the Red Squad, which was a nice touch, adding to how messed up the morality is and everything going on. But also story-wise, tying it to Nog's B-plot from the previous episode, and this being the payoff. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Going back to reactions that parallel real life, not only COVID reactions, there's also the milquetoast pearl clutching of, how can educated elites do bad things? When Ben, Sisko, and Odo are trying to say educated elites are doing bad things. Which is such an irrational reaction when educated elites are the only ones in a position to do really bad things. This reaction is often just pretend or diverting attention or defensiveness. Like, you know your crew got caught, so you feign shock. If you're shocked, you're ignorant. Plausible deniability. Of course, I'm talking less about the show, but how the show parallels the politics of real life. And even the personal politics of people we know. There are other parallels in this episode to our present, with the US as the supreme authority of the world, deciding everything, and everything about the world is being decided in a US city. The use of language, going back to that, Starfleet murdered, but when they were talking about it, I think it was Worf, it was brought up as casualties rather than murders or killings. There's also lots of police suppressing people, which we have been seeing so much of now, not under Trump, but under Biden, under Starfleet. DS9 is our now. But on top of that, this episode had stakes. Crew members were killed, and in this episode, it's been Starfleet versus Starfleet. Things you can't roll back. Things where you can't go back to zero. These episodes matter. And because they matter, I want to know what your thoughts are on this two-parter, this last episode, how you rate it, how you rate the whole thing as a whole.
So this is a great episode. It's very important in where the show goes. We're kind of at the middle point. Season 4 lets you know that the show is different. Sisko has changed his hair. He has a beard. He's a captain. We're meeting characters. It's different. And this is in many ways sort of like the halfway point. So we're understanding that there's going to be less Monster of the Week episodes and there's more buildup. So in the grand scheme of things, again, without giving away a lot, there's a lot of importance here. And understanding that there's discomfort amongst Starfleet is important. Understanding the cost of freedom is important. And understanding the fear of Ben is important. So for that alone, this episode gets a 4.5 because of the stakes that it develops. And I thought it dealt with the subject matter very well. I forgot, even though I watched this episode a few years ago, I forgot that Leighton was the bad guy. I was just like enjoying it. I forgot that it wasn't the changelings that were sowing discontent. I mean, in a way they are, but they're being manipulative. They're just like doing little things.
It's like their existence is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you to clarify something. When you say the fear of Ben, are you talking about Ben's personal fears?
Yeah.
That's interesting to me, knowing that, because he's also supposed to be the spiritual bedrock.
Mm-hmm.
So again, then that's gonna lead to some nice conflicts.
Yeah. This is a very big setup.
We've watched now a bunch of episodes. The premiere was stellar. And I don't know for sure, my memory isn't that great to say this was the best executed 2 episodes. But as of right now, they're the 2 most memorable. Because there's other episodes I know I enjoyed, but I don't remember what they were about. Whereas this one, I guess because of the stakes, because I feel like I'm supposed to remember what happened here because of where we're headed, I guess there's like a difference between like execution and memorability and knowing it's important. And I feel like these 2 episodes had a combination of all of those.
Yeah.
Scott, can you tell us about the next episode?
Odo and Kira sitting in a tree.
Okay. Until then. Ta-da!